Hello everyone, this is 1 Year On. I'm Alison. And following on from episode 24, today's episode is about the flights and airports and how I manage navigating that post-stroke. Up front, I will say that I hate airports. They're laden with so much emotion. People arriving to see people they know and the tears of joy when they meet. And then the opposite when they leave. It's quite overwhelming, really. Think Love Actually with the bit in the film where they film all the arrival hall at London Heathrow. That's the happy bit. Incidentally, I had the opportunity to pass through one of London's arrival halls and somehow I ended up exiting through that space, even though that wasn't our ultimate destination. More about that later, but I digress. I've spent a lot of time in airports travelling for work. Only short haul though, never gone overseas for work. Now in terms of this trip, I knew I would have 4 flights to go on, so 5 airports and 4 planes. In terms of the travel itself, the discussion with my doctor had been about minimising risk. We'd had the conversation about ways that I could achieve that and considered the aspirin that I took, and given blood clots are a concern when you're travelling long haul, we discussed that I could take double the amount of aspirin the weeks before the flights, and in the week after the flights, and also the same at the other end, coming home, taking double the amount a week before leaving and a week after coming back. She was happy with that. This isn't medical advice for listeners. This is just what I discussed with my doctor and what we decided that I would do. Flight socks were a must, and also getting extra leg room on the plane if I could. And having extra time to walk in each airport. Walk, walk, walk. I made sure that I had done as much online as possible before. I ordered our passports and went through all the hoops to get them, and all the details of those were added to our booking. I checked in online as much as I could. I did the extra process with regard to UK immigration, which is a new thing since the last time I visited. At the airport when leaving, I was told we would have to collect our cases and move them from domestic to international departure at our first stop because I had booked our internal flights on frequent flyer points. That wasn't a massive issue, and I did expect it. What I didn't expect though was to having to line up with 300 of my favourite best friends in check-in of the international flight and joining the queue that was supposed to go faster but didn't. That was so noisy, and by the time we got to the head of the queue, we'd eaten up most of our time to be spent in this airport, just standing around, and we were really hungry when we finally got anywhere. And by that time, there were few food places still open when we reached international departures. Given airline food isn't known for being great unless you're flying business class, which we weren't, I wanted to be able to offer me and the kids normal food for as long as possible. The noise in airports wasn't great. Lots of people wasn't great. My loop earplugs got lots of use. I pretty much wore earplugs for the best part of 40 hours without a break. The roar of the aircraft and the cabin noise were particularly tough. When in the cabin, the first international flight had a really strange configuration with the aisle directly in front of me leading to business class, and the aisle was also beside me to the right. So the hosties had to make a dogleg turn to get their trolleys around. They were really bothersome with it. As I had my legs stretched out, as you do when you've got extra leg room in the bulkhead seat, this was the strangest configuration I have ever seen, and I won't be flying this airline again. My cabins also were very weird, having overhead lockers which were directly above me, and when opened, a water bottle ended up falling out and nearly hit me on the head. A metal water bottle, not good. What I found was good was the first airport in Asia where we had lounge access as part of our tickets. We utilised this. They had prepared fresh meals and drinks aplenty, fabulous hot showers to make us feel so much more human. And with our fresh clothes on, we felt clean and ready for further travel. That airport was particularly well signposted and laid out. Well done there. Boarding for our next flight to London Heathrow. We had to empty our water bottles before boarding. There was so much more security than the last time I flew. Your passport and boarding pass were checked at every single stage, but you just do it as you've got no other choice. That plane was full, and I'd been told by one of the airline staff that it was overbooked. That flight was nice, and we had very good seats and a good amount of legroom. The food was indescribable, though barely edible. My children barely ate or slept. I didn't manage to sleep much on the long leg of the long haul. That was about 14 hours. Oh dear, that flight was an endurance test. And I think the only flight longer is the Perth to London leg at 18 hours. There is no way you would get me in that. I remember being unable to watch any films, not because of an inability to watch them, but the airline didn't have a very good range. I thought, compared to what I've watched in the past with other airlines. In fact, I was simply watching the vision of the camera out the airplane looking down to the ground that we were flying over. I was mesmerised by that, looking at the land formations and rock formations. Also, we had internet inside the plane for the first time. So I spent some time chatting with friends back in Australia, as you do. I had to be careful, though, not to run my phone too flat. I needed charge throughout the whole flight, and we weren't allowed to use our power banks inside the plane. When we got off the plane in London Heathrow, what a debacle. Every single time I've gone through Heathrow, it's a shambles coming in from Asia. This was no exception. It's like the airport thinks, how can we make this as hard and confusing as possible for people? And then they do it. When we got there, I knew we would have to change terminal as we had to get one more flight, and it was on British Airways. So that was already in my head. The train between terminals was already in my head to go on. What wasn't in my head was their filtering system of telling you where to go, which was not clear and not helpful. So coming off the plane, we reached our destination of one way or the other. I chose one way, which ultimately got us to our destination, but it wasn't the correct and optimal way, or certainly straightforward way. Certainly it wasn't the way we should have gone, and the people we spoke to on the way were no help. We ended up coming into London Heathrow and exiting as if we wanted to be in London, going through immigration, customs, all that debacle. There was baggage reclaim, but we weren't getting our bags because they were tagged to the end of the next flight in Glasgow. We ended up coming out of the arrivals gate, I mentioned right at the beginning, seeing people with gifts and nameplates waiting for other people. And that was when I knew it was totally wrong. We weren't going in the little train to our British Airways terminal. We were going to have to find our own way there. And thus began a hunt to find out how to do it. The signage was terrible. It was pretty much non-existent. And the noise of the place was awful, and it was remarkably warm and sunny. After going round in circles and getting quite harassed, we found a free inter-terminal bus to go on. There were lots of buses, but they required currency or a bus card, which we didn't have. The inter-terminal bus took us quickly around, and we tried to change our internal flight to just get to our destination quicker. But when faced with them telling us the price, that was going to be something extortionate, that ceased to be an option for me. Coming into Glasgow was strangely familiar. It wasn't in complete pitch black, even though it was late at night, and we would have flown over my old childhood home, but I wasn't able to work out where we were. Touchdown was really great. Coming off the plane was quite emotional, with a fellow saying something about his trip and how long it had taken him to get from A to B. We got chatting about us making a 40-hour trip, and as he'd been complaining of the 90 minutes or so to come up from London, he said, "You win, welcome back," and he gave me a hug. Funny how the Scots can be so familiar and so friendly with complete strangers, and that people just accept it, and it's quite normal to do this. Our bags arrived with no issue, and that was one angst-ridden part of the trip. I'd gotten Apple AirTags and stashed one in each case. Strangely, tracking of one of them showed it over the Indian Ocean. Going back the other way was a lot easier, with the check-in much easier. No collecting bags in London. Leaving Heathrow was a very different experience to coming into it. The staff were more pleasant. Even the passport and customs people were happy to have a laugh. They must see 1,000 faces every day, and I suspect their jobs must be quite overwhelming with the noise and the hustle and bustle. We had a brilliant meal in a nice restaurant in Heathrow Airport. What I didn't bank on was a server charging an extra service fee on the bill, which wasn't announced before we came in. The meal was expensive, although delicious and quickly prepared. And back on the plane, it felt like Groundhog Day. Same plane, even the same seats, actually. Going back, there was a lot more turbulence, and that was stomach turning. The cabin crew were told several times to take their seats, so I knew it must be bad. That set off worrying in me. I managed to sleep for 6 hours in the plane between London and Asia, so I felt amazing. And the lounge in the terminal was exactly as it had been when we'd been through there before. Just so nice to get a decent hot shower and some food when you're on dry land. The flight from Asia to Sydney was fraught, not being able to rest with turbulence and annoying passengers who were having a very loud 4-way conversation and who simply wouldn't settle when they dimmed the lights. I was simply not putting up with that after 2 hours or 3 hours of it. I asked them to observe the quiet time of the plane. Arriving into Sydney, I was ecstatic. Knowing we were on Australian soil was simply wonderful. Immigration was swift, and so swift that we had to wait for our bags to catch up. Clearing customs was straightforward. I had things to declare, and that was dealt with in a straightforward manner, so we didn't delay there either. And then we had a very good arrangement where we signed our bags in for the next flight before we left the international terminal, which I think is a new feature. The very nice lady got us on an earlier flight also, which was very good and quite a relief as we'd been going now for 30 odd hours of travelling. It felt quite weird reaching home and quite tearful, having made such a long trip and without major travel issues. Not losing our bags though was a major win. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share and subscribe. I will be back next time to talk about how I arranged to see everyone. See you later.